Okay, folks, I'd like to welcome you all today, and we are extremely fortunate to have with us a very successful and very well-known FENG speaker, Paul Cecala, a professional in career search. Paul, you're on.
Fantastic. Good evening, all, and thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I have been, as Ernie alluded, a career coach for many, many years, actually almost 25. I've helped clearly over 3,000 people in their job search. You know, I'm really known as the project planning career coach. And I look at job search from a very pragmatic, very practical, strategic, tactical perspective using the principles of project management, especially the metrics involved in to look at how can we move our job search from where we are today to where we want it to be in the future. And from that process, you know, about 85% of the people I work with utilize the methodology. And of those who do utilize it, about 97% of them are employed within 3 to 5 months for mid-level and lower positions, probably 5 to 7 months for more executive level positions. And before we go any further, I do want to just note that a dear friend of mine who is an amazing recruiter here in northern New Jersey in the Hillsdale area, Janelle Rosino, just posted this weekend that she has probably 12 or 15 finance related positions, most of them, you know, director and above levels, currently that she's recruiting for. So if you don't know who Janelle is, you might want to look her up. I just put her name and company name in the chat. Look her up, certainly use my name when you reach out to her, and I'm sure she'll be able to help you out with some opportunities. So take advantage of that. We're going to spend tonight talking about interviewing skills, and specifically, we're going to look at these topics on the screen. Now, I do want to ask you that at any time you have a question, please feel free, unmute yourself, ask the question. I'd rather we do that throughout the program rather than you wait and then we have to go back 5 slides to figure out what you're talking about or you know, get back to the topic. So just ask as I go. I don't mind you interrupting me at all. I think that's good. Okay, any questions on the topics for this evening at the moment? By the way, anything that you want to know specifically about interviewing, let me ask you that so I can make sure I touch on those issues. Bueller. Okay, well, let's go ahead and dive right into it. So this is the Gantt chart for my methodology of project planning your job search. You know, again, we're going to speak specifically to the interviewing piece of this, but you can see there's really about 7 or 8 milestones or primary objectives that we need to accomplish. There's 2 phases to it. The preparation phase, where we're doing all of the groundwork, getting ourselves set up and ready to start job searching. The main work of the job search is networking, first networking with people who can introduce us to hiring managers, and then ultimately networking with hiring managers who will then want to interview us. And you can kind of get a sense of the timeline, how it works for most people. So, let me go ahead and switch to the presentation mode too, sorry. There we go. So I'm going to look at this from the perspective of about 13 different tips that you might want to consider. And if any of you want the slide deck, by all means, you're welcome to have it. You simply just need to reach out to me and ask for it. I've put my contact information into the chat once already. I'll do it again at the end, but also the last slide will have it so you can jot it down or take a picture of it if you want, maybe a screen grab. So the first thing we have to think about when we're looking at our job search, and in particular, how we interview, is we need to think like a consultant would think, which really means that we're always thinking about how are we selling ourselves into the role and into our next role, right? The converse way to look at that, and in that first bullet there really is probably the most important thing you can take from tonight's presentation, and that is we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the hiring manager. The better job we do of thinking like, acting like, talking like that hiring manager, the better we'll do in convincing them that we are the right person for this position. Right? So if you do nothing else after tonight, just start thinking like that hiring manager and responding to people as if you were responding to the hiring manager and looking for what they want, what they need. Because our job search really isn't about us. It's about the hiring manager and their needs, and how do we meet their needs. So we're always looking to sell ourselves. You know, people want to work with problem solvers. They don't want to work with people who present problems and never bring a solution, right? And I know a lot of you are in executive positions, right? Isn't that the kind of person you want on your team, is the problem solver, right? So we need to be that problem solver as well. And when we're talking about our past in particular, but specifically about our qualifications for the role, we always want to be talking in terms of our results. Questions on this? So the second thing I want us to think about in terms of the interview process is that it really needs to be a peer-to-peer conversation, and it needs to be a two-way conversation. I never want to be involved in an interview process where it's like, nope, you need to be quiet. I'll ask all my questions, you answer them, and then maybe if there's time, I'll let you ask your questions. That's not really the way the process should work. It really needs to be a two-way conversation. So we need to be prepared not only to answer questions, but also with the questions we want to ask. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Make sure, remember, of course, that those questions are all open-ended. We rarely, if ever, want to ask a yes, no, closed answer kind of a question. And when we're doing these things, we're going to do it from a perspective of how are we managing the conversation. You know, so I'll answer a question, and then I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to try and steer the conversation to the points that I want to talk about my background and how it fits with the role. So we're constantly kind of playing or dancing with each other as to who is going to be in control or in the lead of the interview. And that's the way we're managing it. Anybody have any thoughts or questions here? So this is going to be a really boring presentation if we don't have some comments from y'all. So please, I really do want to encourage you to ask some questions.
Hey, both Jules. Hey, just follow along what you're saying. It need to get into the discussion, as you said, not just a one-sided. It's a conversation, and try to put them at ease. Also, that's my approach has been. And as you're saying, you want to fix something for them. That's
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that statement. You want to fix something for them, right? We want to be thinking about what do they need? What do they want? What keeps them awake at night? And how can I be the hero that resolves those issues for them? So that way they're going to want to hire me because they're going to want to have that hero on their team. Great comment, Jules. Thank you.
you're welcome.
So,
Paul, hi, this is Ernie. Quick question. How would you have that conversation? Would it be overly inquisitive? Would it be professional? You know, hey, I see you guys had a very severe correction in your 2000 or your 2021 annual report. What happened over there? Who took all the money? I'm being sarcastic.
yeah.
But that's the type of questions that sometimes people don't think twice about asking. How would you give that direction for somebody?
Right, and obviously, those are the kinds of questions you really want the answers to, because that's going to give you a real sense of what's happening in the company and what you're stepping into, right? So you do want to try and ask those questions, but you want to ask them in as soft and politically correct way as you possibly can, so that you're not offensive when you're doing it. And I like to ask questions like that, especially from a perspective of empathy and concern. You know, gosh, that must have been really difficult for you to have to manage the 2 quarters of losses in a row. What do you think was the cause of that? And how do you think we together can fix that?
Good. I'm looking here at a question which came in from Christopher McBride.
Yeah,
He said, is there anything specific on your approach to virtual interviews? And he finds that most processes start these days through virtual interviews.
that's a great question, Chris. And we're going to be seeing more and more first interviews, or even what I'm seeing in most of my clients these days is first a phone screen, then a virtual interview, usually with HR. Sometimes the next interview with the hiring manager is virtual before they start to bring people in, and they whittle it down to the 2 or 3 people that they really are serious about before they start bringing them in the office. We do have a lot of things we need to think about specific to a virtual interview, but most of that is about, is the lighting right? Am I wearing the right stuff? Is the background right? Those kinds of things. Is the technology working properly? But the mechanics of what you're doing in the interview itself really aren't going to change that much. It's more about just all the stuff around you. One of the nice things, though, about a virtual interview is, I can have my resume sitting out. I can have the job description setting out. I can have, especially if I've got multiple devices, I can have one device onto their website looking at stuff and reminding me of research while I've got the other device set to the interview. So there's a lot of flexibility and opportunity for us to be better prepared with a virtual interview versus an in-person interview. We'll talk more about some of those things, the specifics about background and that kind of stuff, a little bit later on in the presentation. But it's a great question.
Yeah, Paul, and I have to compliment you on that. All the layout, I call that professionally cheating. And because the information is out, but I'm gonna take one step further on the resume, excuse me, on the job description. One thing I ask and I am an executive search firm, one thing I ask my candidates to do is to actually document how their accomplishments compare to the requirements of the job description, and
Yes.
enforce that answer, because you are coming, again, as you said earlier, with the solutions.
Well, and one of the ways that I work that with my clients, and we're getting a little off topic, but it's related, is when I'm creating my resume, the bullet points on the resume are all the result statements from the stories I want to tell in the interview. So that when I'm on the interview and the interviewer says, "Holy crap, Paul, how'd you do that?" I already have the answer, right? And so this is one of the tools that we're using to manage the conversation, because if I know what the questions are going to be, I can be better prepared. And an easy way to know what the questions are is to have all of those amazing accomplishment statements right up front in bold on your resume, where the interviewer has to see it and can ask about that. So it's a great comment, Ernie. So tip number 3 is, how do I prepare for the interview itself? And we can go into a lot of detail about all the different kinds of preparation. Obviously, we want to talk about, and we will a little bit, how do we dress, but we need to research, right? And so what you're looking at here is the way I set up the note page on my portfolio or on my pad for this interview. And it may be a little difficult to read depending on the size of your screen, so I can share a copy of this with you if you're interested. But the first thing I want to do is I want to, on my note page, have the contact information for the interviewer. Especially if it's an interview in person, I want to make sure that with me on that note page, I have the phone number to call in case, God forbid, the car breaks down or something. Right underneath that, I'm going to have the 4 or 5 items from my research into the interviewer, into the company, into the position. Those 4 or 5 key items that I want to make sure I talk about in the interview, I'm going to list them there. Usually just some key words that are memory joggers more than anything, but put as much information as you need. The main key here is have the research at your fingertips. And the easiest way to do that is to have some notes jotted down for what that is, right? Next, I'm going to include on that paper the questions that, without the answer to these questions, I cannot say yes to moving forward in the process. Now, the one piece that's not included in those questions at this point is compensation, because we don't want to be talking about compensation until we get an offer. But prior to the offer, what are all of the questions that I have about this position? And really the important ones that without these answers, I cannot say yes to this job. Should be probably 5 or 6, maybe 7 questions. Shouldn't be a whole lot, right? But there should be a few. These are the questions that I'm going to interject into the conversation. And hopefully throughout the interview, we get to answer all of those questions. That's my preparation work that I've got now annotated on my note page. So I've got space to answer those questions, to write down some of those answers. I've got all the information right in front of me that I need, right?
Excuse me, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Francesco. You know, most recently, especially with like the more senior level interviews, it's been like sort of like a hijacking of multiple people on the in the C-suite. And I guess, can we address that in some fashion?
When you say hijacking, you mean you'll have multiple interviews, or you'll have a panel interview with multiple people, all of them in the C-suite?
Yeah, the panel.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the always trick I always have to try to figure out is who's the alpha dog in the room. And it doesn't always necessarily have to be the person with the biggest title.
And you know what? It doesn't matter who the alpha dog is, because if they're sitting in front of you, you need to address their needs, their wants, their concerns.
Got it.
And I'm going to give you one example of how to do that in just a second here, because as you see, what's left on this page are the 4-step method to the interview process. And I'm going to go into each one of these in much more detail. So the key right now is I've got those 4 steps written there so I don't forget what they are. And I make sure that I go through all of them to get through the interview and manage it properly. Okay, so.
Paul, before you move, I have 2 questions here that came in regarding research.
Good.
Chris Thomas asked, how detailed should the research be? And I'm assuming he's talking about research of the company, of the people you're talking to, things like that.
So Chris, part of that, as another FENG group leader likes to say, it depends. I don't know if any of you know, or I know a couple of you here know Marty Latman from North Bergen chapter. Right? Marty likes to say the answer to all your questions always is, it depends. Well, and here's why it depends in this case. You know, if I'm talking to the HR person or the recruiter, I don't need to have the full-blown research on the company, right? But I need enough to be able to talk intelligently about the company and ask appropriate questions. But by the time I'm getting to that hiring manager and the panel interview, or the interview with the multiple people at the C-suite, then I really need to know the company like the back of my hand. I need to have as much detail and as much information as I possibly can. You know, you're going to still need to learn stuff when you get in on the job, but the more you know now at the time of that interview, then the good news is you're going to ask questions you already know the answers to. And the interviewer is just confirming what you already know. Now, what's kind of interesting are those situations where you've got the answer to your question and the interviewer comes back with something completely different. That then says, all right, wait a minute, where's the disconnect? Right? And it spurs more questions of them from you. So the more you know, the better. The one caveat I'll give you is that when it comes to the personal information about the people that you're meeting with, we want to know as much as we can. We just need to be judicious about how we use that information. And I'll give you a quick example of that. I had a panel interview for a career, no, I'm sorry, an admissions position at a college. And I did my research, but the only thing I could find out about one of the individuals was what was on their Facebook page. And so as I'm getting introduced to everybody, I'm saying, oh yeah, I saw this research you did. I love what you're doing about this. That sounds really fascinating related to your work, you know. And then I get to her, oh, congratulations. I understand you got married recently. She got a little scared and offended by the fact that I knew she had just recently gotten married, you know. And what I said to her is, well, you know, I've done my research and I've got friends on campus and they gave me that little tidbit of information. And, you know, I'm happy for you. She didn't necessarily like that answer. So when the interview was done and I had decided at that point, truthfully, I didn't want the position, you know, I had said to her, I'll be honest and tell you how I found out about your wedding. You know, to learn something about everybody in this interview, I went to LinkedIn. I couldn't find you on LinkedIn, so I went to Facebook. And on Facebook, I was able to easily see your entire history. And the most recent thing there was that you got married. And so I thought I would just mention that as a congratulations. I'm sorry if it offended you. Right. What that also does, though, is says to all of us, I hope, note to self, lock down your Facebook page if you don't want your company people or employment related people to see it. What's the other question, Ernie?
The other question is, and it's really related to your answer. Is it possible some of this preparation information can be too cumbersome to organize for a meeting?
That's why, so the quick answer is yes, but that's why we want to take the top 5 or 6 pieces of that information that, based on our knowledge of the interviewer and the position and the company, these are the 5 things that I want to make sure I remember to discuss in this interview. When I get to the next person, those things may change to what's important to that person.
Right.
And I do see your question, Elizabeth, about you know, the first qualifier questions. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment or two, but we'll get you that answer because it's a great question to ask. Anything else at this point?
Nothing right now.
Okay, so Elizabeth, here we go. You know, the 4-step interview process has these pieces that you see here, and the next 5 tips that we're going to talk about are actually going to cover all 4 of them, starting with the first qualifier. And when we start an interview, you know, the first thing we want to do is find out, what is this job really all about? And you're right, Elizabeth, you should have the job description. You should have been able to read it. You should know something about the role before you get to the interview. But the truth is, the job description in particular likely is not current or up to date or really representative of what the individual in front of you wants to know. So let me give you an example. I interviewed for a position as vice president of sales for an aviation company early in my career. My first interview was with the executive vice president, who would be my direct supervisor. And so I said, you know, hey, Michael, tell me, what do you see as the key duties and responsibilities for this position? You know, I've read the job description, but I want to know from your perspective, what's most important? And he said, Paul, it's all about the revenue. You got to drive the sales. You got to get this team performing. I need the money. Okay. Now, the rest of the interview, all of my conversation with him was all about how am I going to drive sales? How am I going to create revenue? How am I going to bring in the money? Right? Even when he asked questions like, tell me about how your management style. I still brought in the fact that my management style was all about driving revenue. Right? The second interview was with the VP of HR. I asked him the question. And he said, Paul, we're really concerned about risk in this company. Aviation's a real risky business. I want to make sure that you're not going to be putting us into any kind of employee lawsuits or any kind of lawsuits from our customers. What do you do about risk management? Okay, now I knew how to respond to all of his questions. The third interview was with the chairman, who at the time was about 55, 60. I was around 30, 32. I asked him the question. And he said, Paul, you're mighty young for this role. I want to know that you're not going to make a fool of me among all of my friends, the presidents, the CEOs, and the chairman of the Fortune 1000, because they're our customers and they're my friends. How can you handle that? Same job, 3 different interviews, 3 completely different responses to this first qualifier question. Tell me what you see as the most important qualities of your ideal candidate, or can you tell me what are the key duties and responsibilities you see for this role? Elizabeth, does that help answer your question?
Somewhat, but I'm just used to seeing full detailed job description prior to that first interview.
Sure, and I had a full detailed job description for that position too. But that job description was so long and covered so many facets. The employers, the people I interviewed with, didn't care about most of that. Each one of them only cared about their small little piece. So that's all I needed to talk about with that person. By the way, I did get the position.
Okay.
Paul, one more quick thing before we go any further. Jagish is asks, given that ageism exists in the job market, does it make sense to bring it up front and center in an interview by asking, is ageism going to be a criteria in your decision making for this position?
Absolutely not. Jagdish, we don't want to bring up anything negative if we can avoid it, number one. Number two, as it pertains to ageism, really what that's about is, are you current and capable to do the job, physically as well as mentally spry enough to do the job, right? And so you want to show that to people. One way you can do that, for example, is instead of bringing in an old-fashioned portfolio with a pad in it, bring in your iPad and say, hey, listen, I've got my notes and everything right here on the iPad. Do you mind if I take notes on this while we're talking? Right? Use your cell phone to set up the next calendar appointment, right? Look current. Now, I'm not saying we all need to go out and dye our hair, chartreuse or something like some of the millennials are doing. But I was talking with a gentleman who was a 35, 40-year veteran engineer with AT&T from way back when it used to be Bell Laboratories. This guy was a brainiac like you wouldn't believe. I met him in 2018 at a networking group. He came into the group with a very, appropriately dressed in a button-down shirt, but he had the pocket protector filled with pens and pencils. He had 1970s style glasses with lenses this big, and he typical Einstein all over the place, uncontrolled hairstyle. And the shirt he was wearing was actually probably about as old as he had been working. It was frayed, looking dingy. It was clean, but wasn't looking all that great. And he said, I'm just not getting any interviews and I don't understand why. So my suggestion to him was simple. He said, this is not going to be the solution, I'm sure, but let's at least try it. Go to your barber, ask him to give you a new hairstyle. Tell him, make it look current, but simple, because I don't want to have to spend time putting mousse and all that crap in my hair. So give me an updated hairstyle. Do yourself a favor, go out and buy a new shirt and get rid of the pocket protector. And I'd probably be wise if you could get a new pair of glasses that looked a little more modern. But 2 weeks later, he came back to the networking group, completely different person. Almost did not recognize him because he took all of that advice and did it. And within 3 weeks, he was employed. He looked like he was 75, 80 years old the first time I saw him. When he came back the next time, he looked like he was 50. He was actually probably about 60. So ageism is, as much as anything, are
Okay.
you looking and acting like somebody that I would want to work with? And if you're looking and acting a hell of a lot older than someone I would want to work with, then you're probably not going to get the job.
And
Yeah, so-
Paul, Paul, also, the phrasing of that question pretty much follows up. Hey, are you going to, is this candidate going to sue us because we didn't hire him?
That's right.
Or are we going to hire him? He's going to be such an SOB jerk, no offense, please, that we don't want to hire him. You want to
Yeah.
make sure that you are collegial and fitting inside the culture of the organization whenever you
Absolutely.
speak to them.
Yes, good point, Ernie. Was somebody else wanting to make a statement? Okay. So what we're going to do with the first qualifier is, typically the interview is going to start with something like, tell me about yourself, right? Or whatever that icebreaker question is going to be. You're going to answer it. By the way, every answer to every question should be no more than 2 minutes. Closer to a minute is better. You're going to answer the question, and then you're going to finish it by starting to take some control and say, but I could talk forever about myself. What I'd like to know from you is, what do you see as the most important duties and qualifications for this role? Or something like that. And then get them talking about the position, right? So the first qualifier is all about talking about the position. So you have a clear understanding of what it is this person wants from the ideal candidate for this role. That then sets up the conversation. And again, it goes back to, it's all about the hiring manager. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's all about the hiring manager, right? So keep asking those questions and talking from that perspective. When you're answering questions, you obviously want to use, well, maybe not obviously, you want to use this format. You probably have heard of it before, STAR format or CAR format, right? We want to use this format. Now, let me tell you, I'm going back to the resume for a second here. If you today, all right, it's late enough, tomorrow, take the time to make a list of all of your accomplishments, especially those that relate to the role you want. And I don't care if they come from your work life, your volunteer life, or where in your life they come from. If it's a skill set or a quality that you've demonstrated somewhere in your life that's important to this role, put that on the list of accomplishments, prioritize that list of accomplishments, and then take the top 10 of them and write out the story behind it using this format. The challenge, problem, situation, or task should take 1, maybe 2 sentences. The action steps would be a paragraph. Here's the challenge. This is what I did to resolve that challenge, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then finish with a powerful result statement that says, holy crap, you did that? How can you do that for me? Then you're going to take those result statements, put them on your resume, like I said before, and it's going to be result followed by the primary action, all right? Reduced AR by 50% through actively managing the 5-person AR team. I don't know, you know what your results would be. That goes on the resume. Now you've got the answer to the question when the interviewer says, how did you go about reducing the AR by 50%? Oh, well, let me tell you about that. When I was working here, this was the challenge. And so I did this, I did that, I did the other thing, boom, boom. And what resulted was we reduced accounts receivable by 50% over the course of 6 months, and it maintained at that level for the remaining 7 years that I was with the company. Great way to answer a question. Remember, we're always speaking to those interviewers' needs and wants, not yours. I can't say that often enough.
And Paul, the other thing is, very quickly for the group, you're also answering those questions very clearly and very concisely, because you did departmentalize the your response. So one thing I recommend you might want to do is write out that acronym CARV, and then follow your pencil across to those letters as you're answering those. So you're not answering a long response, you're providing very clear C, challenge, actions, results, and the value.
Yes.
And KISS. Keep it tight, keep it simple.
Yep. 60 seconds, 90 would be okay. 2 minutes is too long. All right, so let me ask you at this point, what are some questions that you would like to ask on an interview? And by the way, if you see me constantly looking over to the side, I've got my slide deck on this side. I've got the pixels of all of you, the little thumbnail pictures of all of you on the right side. So tell me, what are some of your questions, anyone? What do you like to ask on an interview? Seema, I'm going to pick on you because you're always good for an answer. Talk to me, pal.
Sorry, took me a minute to get off mute. Yeah, so an answer. I'm going to say 43.
No, what are the questions you like to ask on an interview?
Okay. Yeah, so from that perspective, I think the core question that I always am interested in hearing about is what is it that is your major pain point or major problem? And let me explain to you how I've dealt with situations like that in the past, and I can fix or solve or help you with your situation as it stands today.
Perfect.
And offer a suggestion or two as to, what would be a good starting point as to how to begin.
Excellent. Who else? What other questions would you be asking on an interview?
So I usually ask what's the impetus for the hire? Is work changing? Is there turnover? Like, why are you hiring right now? What's the background? That usually gives you an idea of what's going on, and you can start to dig from there.
Perfect, Patrick. I love it. Find out why the position is open and what are you walking into. Love it. Excellent. Eileen, did you want to add something?
That's exactly what I was going to say I'd like to ask.
Okay, good. Anyone else?
I typically ask, what does success look like for this role?
Oh, Elizabeth, that's perfect. I love it. Exactly. A good question. And why is that such a great question?
Actually, I asked that question this morning and I was told, oh, that's a good question. My daughter told me to ask that.
Yep. And by asking that, right, you're really, again, getting to the heart of the matter of what is it that this hiring manager needs and wants from this role. So here's some other questions that I like to ask. You've identified a couple of them, right? So the first two, right, you all came up with. What are some of the most pressing issues that you need to have resolved, right? What's the impact of this of this position on the organization's bottom line? Now clearly in a high-level finance position, you probably have a real idea of what that impact is going to be. But for example, you may be going after a controller's position, and you know what a controller does, but they're going to tell you, well, we really need you to focus in on this because that's where we're really out of control. Ah, okay. Now I know what I'm going to be working on most, right? I love asking culture questions like, what do you like most about working here? Now, clearly they're going to give you the rosy picture, but their body language will tell you a lot. The hesitation in answering could tell you a lot, right? So there are a lot of ways you can get information out of a question like that. The organization's customer service philosophy and management philosophy, right? What is the management style of the C-suite, and how do they like to see things done? So these are some questions that you can ask. They're certainly going to come up with others that are maybe more pertinent based on the research you do. But the important thing is when you walk into that interview, you want to have at least 4 or 5, if not 6 questions ready to go, so that when you are having the conversation and it's a back and forth and we're talking as peers, there's an opportunity for you to ask your questions. You're not sitting there dumbfounded with nothing to ask.
Paul, I have a question.
Yes, Lilo.
So from, like, for example, what do you like most about working here? If these interviews are mostly virtual and you mentioned body language and things like that, typically are these questions that are easily discernible from a virtual perspective, or are some better than others?
Everybody says that the concern about a virtual interview is that, or virtual anything, is that you don't get to see the full body language. And there's a lot of truth to that. Right? But we're going to be able to pick up something. And so we're going to take what cues we can get and then work with them. And that may bring us to ask more related questions, or it may be that we feel comfortable with what we know based on what we see and hear, and we move on to the next topic. There's no one answer fits all here, to be honest, but you want to be asking questions that are going to be somewhat difficult. You don't want to put them, make it all easy for them, just like they're not making it easy for you.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Now, we know that the interview is coming to a close. And typically we know that because the interviewer says, what? Do you have any questions for me?
Right.
We know now that the interviewer is kind of done. And of course, the wrong answer for you to give is, no, I have no questions, Ernie. You've just been so amazing in giving me information. You've told me everything I need to know about this job, right? Baloney. So of those 5 questions you've prepared already, if there are any of them you haven't asked, now is the time to ask them. But then we want to still have 2 more questions in our back pocket we're going to ask every single time. And the term trial close comes from the sales process. In a high-end sale, the salesman is going to want to check in with you periodically and see, are you ready to buy yet? Are you going to go with me, or are you going to choose my competitor? And so they're going to ask some questions that are going to lead you to give them the response that will answer for them, yes, you're ready to buy, or no, you're not. We're going to do the same thing in an interview. And I'm actually going to do it tonight with you before we're done. So at the end of the interview, when we get to the trial close, this is the chance now to turn the conversation from it's all about the job to now it's all about me. So I'm going to ask the interviewer, hey, Ernie, tell me, what do you like about me as a candidate for this role? Notice I'm shaking my head, smiling, right? What do you like about me as a candidate for this role? And what I want the interviewer to do is give me all the reasons they're going to say yes. This is why I want to hire you. Sweet. Hopefully there's 5 or 6 of them. Then I'm going to ask some version of a question that gets at their objections. So I might do something like, hey, Jules, can you tell me what would prevent you from moving me forward in the process? Right? Elizabeth, is there any reason why I would not be your ideal candidate for this job? You want to get some kind of a question in there that's going to get them to tell you all the negative feedback that they normally don't want to give. Hopefully, there's either none or just one thing that they throw back at you. Now, clearly, if they give you 1 positive and 5 negatives, we ain't getting this job, right? But if you're getting 5, 6 positive reasons with only 1, maybe no reason why they don't want to hire you, you've got a pretty good shot at moving forward. Whatever negative they give you, this is your opportunity to turn it around and make it into that positive. So, well, Paul, we were really looking for somebody who had more, strict EBITDA experience. Oh, well, let me tell you about my EBITDA experience and how I calculate that and what I include and what I don't include. And right, and you give them a response that then says, oh, okay, you do get it. You understand. Cool. Let's move on. Right. So the trial close is going to come at the very end of the interview. It's the last 2 questions that you're going to ask before we close the interview completely. Questions?
Hey, Paul, this is Francesco. Is that the same as the presumptive close that the sales guys will use?
Yes. Well, no, not really. Honestly, no. The trial close is really where they're trying to figure out, are you or are you not going to buy, right? We get to the presumptive close really in tip 9, which is where now I'm presuming I've got the job, so I'm going to ask you for it, right? Or I might even go so far as to say something like, gee, Francesco, you just gave me 5 reasons why you like me for this position, and you really didn't have any reason why you didn't want to hire me. Why don't we save a lot of time and effort and a lot of telephone tag? Let's schedule that next interview right now before we leave. This way, there's no question in anyone's mind, right? That's
Yep.
more of a presumptive close.
Got it. Yep. Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
But I would do that, by the way. I still am going to have that conversation at the end of the interview, right? So I didn't just throw that out there as something to say to answer your question. I would recommend to you that's what you want to do at the end of the conversation. The concept behind this is the number one reason salespeople fail is because they just don't ask you to buy. I worked at Macy's for a long time during the holidays when I was unemployed. I had 3 periods of long-term unemployment, so I worked at Macy's part-time. And the management team, everybody in the store that had any connection to what I was doing was constantly asking, Paul, as a part-timer, how come you are selling as much or more than our full-time salesman in the department? And I said, it's really simple. 2 things. I talk to everybody, and nobody leaves without me upselling them on something. So I'm constantly asking for the sale. We need to do the same in our job search. We need to ask for the job at the end of every interview. Now, as I suggested to Francesco, asking for the job may not literally be hire me, although that could be an appropriate question or response. More likely, though, it's going to be take me to the next step. Let's go forward. Okay. And then as you're walking out the door, you want to say, hey, listen, I really loved having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for your time. I really believe, based on our conversation and your responses, that I'm the right candidate and I'm qualified to do this job. I'd just love for you to make me that offer as soon as possible. And then you sign off on the internet or you walk out the door. So those are the 4 steps to the interview process. First qualifier, you want to make it all about the job. What are the duties and responsibilities? The second step is the conversation. We've outlined what that conversation is going to be because of the things we learned in that first qualifier about the job. The third step is going to be the trial close. Let's test the waters and see if they need more information. And then the fourth step is asking for the position. And always, always, always set up your next conversation. Once the conversation stops with the employer, you no longer have an opportunity to get that job. But as long as you are continuing in conversation, you'll have the opportunity. And that plays to, the next tip. Wait, it's not there. I have to go check that. But follow up. We want to always be following up with the interviewer and everybody involved in the process throughout the process. And let me give you one quick story about follow-up. I was working with a young man. He was only about 25 or 26 at the time. And he had identified his ideal company that he wanted to work for, the ideal position he wanted in that company, and he went after it with a vengeance. It got down to it was him and another person for the position. The other person had about 15, 20 years experience, was a little older, but he got to the point where he was one of the top 2 candidates. They ultimately decided to go with the more experienced person. He said to the hiring manager, I really appreciate the thank you but no letter. And I really, really appreciate all the time you spent with me and the conversations we had and everything that I've learned about this role and about this company. I have to tell you, more than ever before, this is the place I want to work. And I know at some point I'm going to work for you. Can we keep in touch? Month after, he sends the guy an email. Hey, just want to let you know, this is where I'm at in my job search. 2 months go by, 3 months. Every month, he's keeping in touch with this hiring manager in some way. Just saw this article. I thought of you immediately. I think this would be perfect for you to think about with the role. By the way, still happy to come work for you if something changes. 6 months after he was denied the role, the person they hired did not work out, got fired. They never bothered to post the position, never interviewed another person. They called this kid up and said, hey, listen, we'd love for you to come back and work for us now. He goes, oh my God, I was just getting ready to let you know, it's been 2 weeks. I just started a new job. I'm really excited by it, but it's not as good as what I would do with you. And I really would prefer to work for you. Can you give me 2 or 3 weeks notice, or 2 or 3 weeks before I start, so I can give them notice and make the transition out of here appropriately? I said, sure. 3 weeks later, he was employed at the company of his dreams in the job of his dreams at that time. That was 13 years ago and 3 promotions ago. He got the job purely because he kept in touch. That's what we need to do. Questions at this point on the whole interview process, the mechanics of it, right? And also on follow-up.
I have a question on the set the next conversation, next steps.
Sure.
So you say, let's just schedule the next step now. And the interviewer says, let me get back to you.
That's great. I understand you can't make that decision right on the spot now. But I do want to set up our next conversation because this is an important job to me and I want to work here and work for you. So when do you think you'll be ready to set up the next interview? Well, we've got, another week's worth of interviews to do with other people. Great. Today is Monday. If I haven't heard from you by Monday morning next week, can I give you a call or reach out by email Monday afternoon to set up that next conversation?
And that's great. And then you don't get that response or your call isn't taken. At what point does it be? Is that a signal versus, and you don't know for sure, the guy he has his job to do, so he or she got really busy. So at what point are you a nuisance, or are you really getting the signal they don't want to move this forward?
So over time, the number of contacts you make or the frequency of contacts is going to diminish. And the conversation is going to change, right? The first couple of times that it may be, I'm just following up on my interview, really enjoyed it, can't wait to work for you, love to know what the status is, right? Something along those lines.
Right.
But then after that, it's going to be, hey, I just saw this article about this is what's going on in the company. Congratulations on those third quarter profits. Really looks fantastic. By the way, I'm still interested in the role and would love to hear back from you when you have a chance. Right? Maybe a week or two later, it's, hey, I just attended this conference and heard about this new trend. Curious how that's impacting you. Love to have a conversation. Let's talk.
Those are great suggestions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, but that's, we're going to keep the conversation going as much as we're able. Obviously, at some point, yeah, they're not going to talk to you, so you're going to move on. And instead of trying to reach out once a week or once every couple of weeks, it may be once a month or once a quarter, but you're still going to reach out.
Paul, can I just say one thing?
Go ahead, Mark. Mitch, sorry.
You don't think that might be a bit too aggressive? The only reason I'm saying that is because I've seen it a lot of times at the end of the interview, they usually say that HR will be contacting you for the next steps.
Great. I can't wait to hear from HR, Mitch. Thank you for letting me know that's the process. Listen, if they haven't gotten in touch with me by when did you say they're going to do that? Yeah. So if they haven't gotten in touch with me by then, can I just give you a quick email or call and let you know that the status of the process, and maybe you can help me understand whether or not I'm moving forward.
Got it. Thanks, Paul.
And I got to tell you, this is where we want to be tenacious, because as soon as we let the ball drop, it's gone. You're done. Don't let the ball drop.
How do you navigate that line between tenacity and just being a pest? Because I've been on the receiving end of that as well as a hiring manager.
And you got to read the situation, Patrick. Got to read it. Everybody is going to be slightly different. I mean, we could spend a lot of time just talking about follow-up. So I'll give you kind of a quick answer, and we can talk either individually or y'all can have me come back and we can talk just about follow-up. The first contact is going to be, I've set this date and time when I'm going to follow up with you. And I'm not going to leave the interview until we've got a point where I'm going to set up that date and time. And it's going to be maybe a conversation just to set up another conversation. That's fine, right? That day and time comes, I'm going to make the phone call, because if I don't, well, now I don't follow through, so I'm not worth hiring. So I set up that date, I make the contact. I'm going to try and do it by phone. Then I'm going to, the next day, send an email. As promised, I left you a message yesterday. I'm sure you were busy. Can't wait to talk to you, hopefully today, about the next step. A couple of days later, I may just leave a voicemail, or probably I'm going to just try and call, hope they pick up. And if they don't, I won't even leave a message. A week later, I'll take that initial email that I sent, and I'm going to resend it as if it's the first time I'm sending it. Just change the timing so that it reads as, supposed to talk to you last week. Let's talk today, right? And then I'm going to taper off. I'm going to still maybe try and call and not leave a message. I'm going to try and do that call a couple of different times of the week, a couple of different times a day, to see if I can catch you at your desk and get a chance to talk to you. But I'm not always going to leave a message. Maybe once every third or fourth time I'll leave a message. And then the time between those contacts is going to increase, so that by the end of a month or so, I'm really down to about one conversation a week. or 1 attempt a week. And after the 2 months, I may be down to 1 attempt a month. Because probably after 2 months, if we've heard absolutely nothing, the chances are they probably are not going anywhere. Now, as quickly as I make that statement, I can give you 3 examples from the 4th quarter of last year, clients who said it took 5 months from their last interview to when they had the next contact with the company. And that next contact was, we're setting up the next interview, or you're our candidate of choice. Go figure.
Paul, Ernie Russum again. I have a question from the field.
Yeah.
Arrest asks, any tips on interviewing with private equity?
So, Arrested, I'm not sure that there is anything specific that I would say you want to do differently, whether it's private equity or anyone else. The process is the process. The steps are the steps. The specific questions you ask or the specific information that you're sharing, that may change based on the specific situation. But overall, I think this process has been proven. You know, I got the basics of it from an organization called the 5 O'Clock Club, which I was a certified coach for them at one time. It has been extensively researched over the last 40 years, and it has always come out to be the process that works. And literally, you know, I can tell you from my client's experience and from my own experience, better than 95% of the time, we're moving on to the next step using this process.
Paul, I wanted to add a perspective. We don't have to go back to the slides, but when you were talking about the fact that you should answer a question and then ask a question. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in my career, which has served me very well, is just to think of it as a professional conversation.
Yes.
Rather than an interview. Because
Yes.
an interview, you're sort of setting yourself up to being cross-examined by an aggressive prosecutor, if you know what I mean. And if you
Absolutely.
shift that mindset, it just, I think, helped me certainly to come across more confident and valuable and thoughtful.
Perfect. That's a great comment, and I love it. Thank you, Eileen.
You're welcome. Thank you. This has been great.
Thank you. So tip 10. Yeah. Last one, and then I got to move on. Go ahead, Jules.
Just real quick, just wanted to add that I just think about it as a meeting instead of an interview process.
That's right.
Don't as a regular meeting.
That's right. And
Different
really,
point.
I would argue that whether it's a business meeting or an interview, the process is going to be the same.
Correct.
You're going to want to use that same 4-step method in how you conduct the meeting in order to get the most valuable information and utilize the time most efficiently to move forward in whatever the process is you're moving forward. You listen, number 10 here, these do's and don'ts, you know, most of this is pretty standard stuff. You know, most of these things, so I'm really not going to spend a lot of time on them, but just as a reminder, make sure you've got the phone in airplane mode. You know, you're going to smile, keep good eye contact, all of those things that we've all heard 110 million times. The one thing in the don't that I do want to just note, we don't want to be aggressive. We do want to be assertive. Okay, and that's a fine line, I know. But you do want to be assertive in letting these people know that you really want this role. You just don't need to be, you know, almost angry or negative or overbearing in the way you go after it. That's not assertive, that's aggressive.
Paul, if I can ask one more question, sorry, before we leave this,
Yeah.
and help me out here. I'm sorry, so far you've followed I don't know if you've been looking at my procedures for interviewing and preparing people for interviewing, but you've done a very good job of it. What would you do as far as a thank you note, thank you letter, thank you email? How would that be constructed? When would you send it?
Okay. So I am a proponent of all of the above, right? The more the better. Obviously without going overboard. So within 24 hours, but not within the first hour after, I want to send that thank you email. It should be a formal email, and I want to kind of rehash the stuff that's most significant from the interview. You were asking about my experience in, and these are the places where we seem to connect. You know, this is how I see from our conversation why I'm the perfect person for this role, right? If there's something that you did not address properly or well in the interview, and now that it's been a couple of hours and you thought about it, you go, oh, crap, I really screwed that answer. Then you can respond to that and say, you know, upon thinking about this question, here's a different way that I would rather have answered it. And so you can give that answer. You don't want to give too much new information though. So email within 24 hours. The reason why I say don't send it within that first hour, because there's no way you could have put any thought into it. And I'm going to take it as you have a canned response. You just change the name at the top and hit send. That's going to be meaningless to me. So take some time to individualize it and craft it. And by the way, when you're having that interview with the panel, you're going to send that thank you individualized to each person that you spoke with on that panel. And then you may copy the person in charge or your hiring manager so that they see all of the responses, but you want to make sure that your response is individualized to each person. I would like to see you get a thank you note in the mail also within 24 hours. You know it's going to take 2, 3, 4 days before it gets from your mailbox to theirs, and then maybe another day or 3 before it gets through the company mail system. And now with people working from home half the time, who knows when they'll actually get it. Doesn't matter. Send it anyway. Because don't you really like getting mail that's not a bill? So make the person feel good. Send them that thank you note. I don't think we need formal thank you letters anymore. I think email takes the place of that. And I think in our roles in finance, it would be really almost tacky to try and do something too far out of the box and send a little gift or, you know, something else along. You know, you hear people all the time say, oh, I put a shoe in the box because I said I want to be the shoe that walks in your steps or something, and that got me the job. Yeah, well, there's a place where that's going to work. I don't think it's going to work in your world, right? But you need to read the employer. You need to read the situation. Who knows? It may be an organization like a Musk organization where that maybe will work, in which case you do it. Does that help, Ernie? Great.
Yes, yeah, yes, Paul, that does. And the other thing too about it is that one thing that I always find beneficial is understanding the timing for next steps, because it certainly does not make sense to send someone a letter if they're making a decision in the next 72 hours. And that's the other piece which comes back to it as well.
But I'll tell you, Ernie, the only reason why I would suggest do it anyway is because how many times have we been in a situation where the interviewer has said, oh God, I'm going to be, you know, making my decision on Friday and I want the person to start on Monday. And here it is a month later, nothing's happened.
Mhm.
Right? So
Gotcha.
do it. The worst thing that can happen is it gets there too late. The best thing that can happen is you're the only one who does it. They've not made a decision, and that sways their decision.
And Paul, that's one thing I also want to emphasize with you and with the team is I cannot tell you how many times I have heard from the hiring client, oh my gosh, they sent me a thank you email, or they sent me a thank you letter. And I go back to myself and I play stone cold, stone faced and say, yep, isn't that surprising? Isn't that great? I'm thinking to myself, I bet you I know how that was designed, what they said and how they said it. So
Yet less than 25% of candidates send anything after the interview.
Paul, I'm
Wow.
having trouble understanding why one would send, in this day and age, why one would send a thank you letter as opposed to a thank you email.
That's what I said.
Oh,
agree
okay, I
with
didn't
you.
hear
Yep,
you
yep,
say
no, I
it that
agree.
way.
I think the letter is passé at this point because we should be doing it by email to get the more immediate response.
Yes, and avoid the risk of it not getting anywhere, never mind getting somewhere in a week.
Right. So in terms of dress, I still am very conservative. I would want to see you dressing at least one step above the role. I tell the story quite often. When I was in my aviation days, I would literally go to the local airport and walk into the chief pilot or director of aviation's office. So imagine walking into the office of Philip Morris, director of aviation, not a small company, right? And he's there in his three-piece suit waiting for the CEO to arrive to get in the plane and go. Well, if I walk in there dressed as I am today, I'm totally underdressed. And he's not going to want to spend any time with me. Who the hell is this schmo? Right? So I needed to dress in a good business suit, banker's kind of suit, right? Every single day. But I would walk out of that director of aviation office down onto the floor of the hangar to talk to the chief pilot, who's elbows deep in grease, pulling an engine apart. And if I walked down there in that suit, he'd be like, who the hell are you and who are you trying to impress? So I'd rather dress up, because when I did go down to that hangar, I'd take the suit jacket off, throw it over my shoulder. I'd unbutton my top collar and loosen the tie. I'd even roll my sleeves up a roll or two, and usually go get a box of donuts from the car. And that's how I'd walk into the hangar. And now this chief pilot is seeing me all dressed up. The chief of maintenance is seeing me on his level. I'm able to work with and talk to both of them. But if I go in there dressed down, I can't clean myself up and get formal enough for that higher level role. So dress up at least one level above the position or one level above the standard of the company's dress code, because you can always open that up and dress it down a little bit if it's uncomfortable for the interviewer that you're overdressed. I still believe in power colors, red and gold for power and success, and clean white, simple black, gray, navy suits for the attire wherever possible.
Paul, what do you do when I'm in Texas, it's hot, and they tell you it's business casual?
I'm still gonna go in khakis, a dress shirt, maybe a short sleeve shirt, but a dress shirt. I'm gonna have the tie on, and I'm gonna have the sport coat on. They're telling me it's business casual, right? I'm still dressed a little bit above that. In your case, I would probably still put a nice but loose and breathable white blouse with maybe a pin or a necklace that's got some gold and red in it, and maybe a skirt, or maybe some kind of a nice, I want to say A-line. I'm not sure if that's the right style dress, but it's some kind of a nice dress. So I'm still dressed up. Am I going to wear stilettos? Hell no, because they're saying business casual, right? So I'm going to wear nice shoes, but they're not going to be high heels of any kind. Does that make sense?
Right, thank you.
Paul, it's pushing an hour and 20 minutes. We
Yes.
are losing people.
I know, and I'm just about done too. So that's why I wanted to keep things moving. So Don't negotiate the salary till you get to the offer. Remember, the first one who gives a number is the loser. You don't want to be that loser. And we can spend a whole hour just talking about negotiation. So we'll do that some other time. But the key is you want to hold off on that until the very end. And finally, remember, as I've said 100 times already, the conversation ends, the opportunity ends. So don't let that conversation stop. So these are the things we've covered. Just real quick, a couple of things that I've got coming up. These are some other presentations I'll be doing in the next month or so. I point out here, I'm starting a program that's 6 two-hour training sessions on the job search process. It's for a specific group. But if you know of an organization that would be interested in learning more detail about all the steps of this model, I've got a full 12-hour training program on that I'd be happy to share with people and teach. So just let me know. And these are some groups that I run on a regular, co-facilitate on a regular basis. This one, the bottom, is just like your group here. It's a speakers group. These others are strategic support groups where everybody on the call gets an equal amount of time to give us an update on what's going on in their job search and what challenge they have. And so that should take maybe a minute or two for you to do that. And then the remaining 8, 10, 12 minutes of your time is the group brainstorming together. How do we resolve that challenge for you? Very, very, very powerful process. So if you're interested in any of these groups or attending any of these presentations, just let me know and I'll be happy to get you connected to them. And there's my contact information once again. I saw, I think, at least one person asked for the slides in the chat. I would really appreciate it if you would either connect with me on LinkedIn and ask for them, or even better, email me to ask for them, just so it's all in one place, because I'm going to forget what's in the chat tonight by tomorrow when I go to send that out. Hey, let me put my contact information back in here and enter. There you go. Stop sharing and come on, there we go. 2 quick questions. 2 or 3 people to respond. What did you like most about the conversation tonight? Okay, so I failed.
Hey, Paul, it's Steve Schweitzer. How are you?
Good, Steve, go ahead.
Good. I'll tell you what I got out of it. I think it reaffirms a lot of the approach that I took already. It's always good to have that reinforcement. There's always, bits and pieces that you can pick up from you versus me. But again, I think it does reaffirm a lot of what I've already done. The one thing that I'll say that I took away from it was really trying to lock down the next conversation. Sometimes you just assume that it's gonna, like you'll hear, hey, this conversation, I'm talking about the receipt, their end. So you'll hear, oh, this was a great conversation. You'll even get a response from an email that you may have sent, and you're pretty positive. But at the end of the day, you never locked in that, that next step, right? So for me, I think that was the one thing I'd really try to take away from this is lock that in.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
All right, Paul.
Paul, I really appreciated how very practical and non-gimmicky you were, and you had really good examples throughout. Unlike many other speakers that I've heard, I really thought it was a first-class presentation.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you very much. Anybody else real quick?
Paul, I'm going to close it up.
Okay.
I have to tell you guys, whenever I talk to someone who's in job search and I hear about their last job interview or where they are in their processes, I sit back and understand, and I explain to them why they need to have an executive recruiter leading them through the process. Folks, I'm going to tell you what Paul outlined tonight and what in the depth and a lot of it is everything that an astute executive recruiter would be telling the candidates who they're presenting in front of their client to make that recruiter and their firm look the best. Guys,
Absolutely.
we're going to send this out for recording. We are still recording. I am going to suggest that you go back over this presentation, hear it again and again until it sinks in, until it becomes rote. And I'm telling you, you are going to be best served. And when
Thank
you
you, Ernie.
get your next job, please let Paul know and thank him because you followed his processes.
Yes. Well, thank you. I appreciate that very, very much. Listen, y'all, have a great night and a great week. And I look forward to hearing about all of the people who get employed. Thank you.